Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. And as we delve into this week's topic, a reminder that some of the content may be of a sensitive nature. Now, here's your host, Des Kennedy.
Welcome to this week's edition of Momentum. It is really great to be with you again this week. Tim in the chair and Des as well from the opposite side of the country. How are you doing, Des? Are you good?
I'm doing great, man. It's great to be on this call. It's fantastic. It's great to have Rob with us. I know you're going to introduce him anyway, so that's all good.
Officially, Des just gave you a bit of a sneak peek into what's happening this week. But before we get there, Momentum Australia is the website. You can go there and check out a whole bunch of resources for yourself that will help you in your journey doing life that little bit better. Give us some feedback about the show. If you've got some questions too or topics that you'd love us to explore, by all means do that on the website. You can check out the podcast as well for previous episodes of Momentum. And if you feel inclined to support this not-for-profit organisation and ministry, we'd love to have your support so that we can continue to do that. Again, momentumaustralia.org is the website for more details. Tim and Des with you. As we said, this is Momentum. It's a men's show by men for men. And we've got a great bloke in the studio with us today. His name is Rob Furlong. Rob's the senior pastor of Woodvale Baptist Church here in Perth since 2017. Prior to that, though, he served at Perth's Thornley Church of Christ and also at Baptist Churches of WA as a pastoral consultant. He is passionate about leadership development, mission, and God's Word. He has extensive experience in teaching, training, preaching to both leaders and church members. Over the years, he's also had regular spots on radio and was a regular guest of mine for a few years too, offering wisdom and advice around relationships, something he's well informed to do because Rob's been married to Karen for I don't know how many years, we'll find that out, but he's got 4 kids and 15 grandkids. Rob Furlong, officially welcome to Momentum.
Thanks, Tim. Great to be here. And Des, nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, likewise.
So we've just given you a brief background of who you are, but we're going to explore that this week. And
sure.
The next show we do with you, we want to get really topical about something that you've done recently. Bit of a tease for next week, but let's get back to right now. Tell us a bit about your upbringing. What was that like for you? Because for a lot of us, that impacts wildly on how we live as adults. So tell us a bit about your upbringing.
So I was born into a non-Christian Catholic family, and like our other esteemed co-host here today, Des, actually an Irish Catholic background is what I came from, but I couldn't even tell you at what point my family moved to Australia. It's gone back, several generations. But interesting mix in that because so there was on my grandfather's side, this Irish Catholic mix, but my grandmother was half Italian.
Right.
So when you talk about a background, it is actually an interesting background because you put Irish and Italian together.
Yes.
It's a pretty fiery mix, actually.
You end up with pasta and potatoes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very carb heavy, yes.
So there was a whole bunch of stuff that came with that. And some of the things as we talk about, I guess if I want to get to the heart of growing up into that family, relationships was an interesting way. We had an interesting way of doing relationships in my family. And particularly coming out of the Italian side, the whole business of grudges and forgiveness was actually a very big issue in my family. And
as in it wasn't done well?
It was not done very well at all.
Right.
So grudges were held. Forgiveness was rare. There were certain no-go zones. I can remember my dad saying to me that, there were certain things he could just not forgive people for.
Wow.
So, and I've discovered that's not dissimilar to other people from a background with some Italian heritage as well. That whole relationship thing, holding grudges, unforgiveness, big deal. So that was a very big deal in my family.
So that would create interesting conversations around family gatherings if certain people couldn't forgive someone or if there was tension or people just didn't speak to one another. Do you remember that as a kid? Do you remember those sorts of tensions?
Well, they were interesting conversations. You just didn't have them. Because you just didn't have them. That was the other thing. You didn't talk about certain things. But yes. So, for example, there was a period in my early teens, probably late primary school, early teens, when my grandmother was, because my grandparents separated when my father was 8, but she had a lot of expectations and demands, and her expectation was that Dad would come over and be working in her garden every Sunday afternoon. Anyway, he drew a line in the sand over that. And as a result, Nana refused to come to Christmas. She just cut us off completely.
Oh, wow.
So, but here's the weird dynamic, right? So her and Pop have been not divorced, because for a Catholic, that was a big no-no for him. But here's the deal. They have lived separately for decades, still did everything together as a married couple. But now that, they're separated, right? Now that Nana's not coming to Christmas, Pop doesn't come because he doesn't want to upset her. So this went on for, it felt like a long time. It was probably maybe 2 years at the outside, 3 Christmases. But when you're a young kid, that's a long time. And just no communication with Nana. Everything's cut off and all this kind of stuff. And finally, the breakthrough came. I think there was one Christmas I was getting to my later teens, and my other brother, we just decided something has got to be done here. And so we went down and we just about begged our grandfather to come to Christmas.
Wow.
And he did. He broke down, like not crying, but broke down, came to Christmas. And then at some point things got restored with Nana, and, but nobody ever talked about it.
Sure.
So that's the kind of stuff. Yeah, I remember that stuff.
Yeah, okay. So aside from that, which obviously is something you remember vividly, tell us a bit more about your childhood. What was that like for you? What was the dynamic at home for you?
That's a really, I'm just trying to think of the right word to say, Tim. It was, look, we were a good family in the sense that Dad was a good provider. Mum came from a background, she was, the terminology used in those days was she was a bastard. She was the product of an affair. So her mum was an alcoholic. My mum was an alcoholic. But she's come out of this horribly broken situation. You've got Dad coming out. He's an only child coming out of his broken situation. And they don't have great skills in terms of raising kids. My recollections of Dad was a lot when we were young. He's very angry, and you didn't want to upset him. Mum could be, very nasty at times, but not all the time. But there was just that dynamic there that probably, I think, led for me a lot of anxiety and insecurity. And yet there was the other side of it where what Mum and Dad tried to do, they didn't have many tools or skills at all for raising kids.
Yeah, of course.
They did the best with what they had. And Dad, they were both determined to keep the family together, which they did. But that, they had 3 sons, but that came at a price, because it meant that certain issues never got dealt with. For example, we never talked about Mum's alcoholism, which is, I know now, that's the classic sign of an alcoholic family. Everybody knows there's a problem, but you never talk about it.
That's right.
And then years later, the conversation comes up, and I can remember Dad saying, well, son, we've talked about this. I'm sitting there going, no, we haven't.
So can I ask then, you mentioned Mum and the Lord has used her in your life, but then put the flip side of that.
Yeah.
We're dealing with an alcoholic mum as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's almost like this extreme or juxtaposition where she's got this incredible voice on one hand, but then there's this other stuff happening behind the scenes that nobody's really talking about.
So I'm not saying my mum was a Christian. Now, both my parents have passed away, but I got to lead them through prayers of repentance before they died. So I'm trusting God that they're there. I mean, there's always some doubt around that, but God knows the intent of their heart. But see, what I came to discover was, because the second major time it happened was at a period in my relationship with Karen where we met. She got converted. We met, started dating. We got engaged fairly soon, and then Karen went through a period, because there was a lot of stuff in her life that had to be dealt with, and she went through a period where she walked away from the Lord for she did, but she didn't. But she made some poor choices, got herself into a fix, and we split up. She just, in terms of, broke off the engagement. Anyway, in the midst of all of this, and so I just didn't pursue her, because I've been told, look, don't, give her some space and stuff like this. But there was this very significant moment after about 3 months of this when, and I'd started to think to myself, I think I need to go and talk to Karen. I need to make an approach to her. And my mum says to me, if you love this girl, you need to go after her.
Wow.
I talked to a guy in our church And again, I can remember sitting in the car, we're talking, and I said to him, "Hey, Vince, can God talk through non-Christians?" And he said,
It's a valid question.
and he said, "Absolutely." And I told him what had happened, and he said, "You should do it."
Mm.
And I did. And that was one of the turning points in Karen and I, or certainly in Karen coming back to the Lord. It wasn't the only turning point, but it was one of those. And it was significant.
Yeah.
And she was only, let's bear in mind, she was only probably 6 months in her faith. But there was a lot of junk that she had to deal with. And that's part of our story in terms of the kind of ministry God has given us over the years.
Right.
So just one question, Rob. How did you guys meet?
At church.
Well, there you go.
But see, so look, brief snapshot on the story. So I'm 19 years of age. So it's 1979. And I'm told that this girl has come to Christ and she's only 19. Well, she was 18. They got that wrong. But they're trying to line me up. I haven't even met the girl and they're trying to line me up. And me being stubborn the way I am, I just thought, no one's lining me up. And so she comes to church the next day. Like, my wife is gorgeous, but I'm just going, no way, because I'm not going to be set up. Well, it didn't take long for me to change my opinion. And so a couple of weeks later, I approached the pastor to tell him I was thinking of inviting her out because he'd been counseling her and stuff like that. And we met. Karen had come from a Baptist family, but her mum and dad were not. Her mum had come to faith in her 40s when the marriage broke up. But her dad was not a Christian. They were not practicing. But it was her grandmother and her dad's brother, he and his wife, who'd prayed for Karen. It's a long story there.
Let's take a short break and come back and explore then how you guys started unpacking some of the stuff when you first got married, but then also your ministry journey as well and how you've ended up to where you are today. That's on the other side of this break. We're going to take a short break. In the meantime, again, check out the website for details of Momentum. You are listening to Momentum. MomentumAustralia.org is the website if you'd like to offer us some feedback, some questions, or your support to Momentum. You can head to the website, MomentumAustralia.org. We'll be back with Rob Furlong in just a moment.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at MomentumAustralia.org.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
You're listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. Find out more at MomentumAustralia.org.
Well, welcome back to Momentum Australia, our Momentum show, Men for Men. And we're talking today with Rob Furlong, who's been a senior pastor at Woodville Baptist Church since 2017. Rob, welcome back to the second half of the show.
Thanks, Des. And I don't want to correct you, but it's Furlong.
Furlong. Oh, sorry.
I'm not offended. Believe me, I've been called all sorts of things over the years. So
maybe you should just change your surname, Rob. Might make it easier.
It might.
It's really cool. We were talking earlier about with Rob about his family and growing up and the conflicts in the dynamics of the family and how he ended up, coming to Christ and so he had met his wife and they had started their relationship. So talk us through what happened at that point, Rob.
So there's probably two things I'll focus on. One will be for Karen and stuff that she was carrying, and stuff for myself, and how we began some of the process of working it out. So I'd mentioned earlier that, Karen drifted away from Christ for a period of time. One of the key issues for her was that she said yes to this guy. She loves me, and that never changed, even in that 3-month period. But she had a secret, and she was saying, as she said, I've said yes to this guy, but he doesn't know me. And so there came the night when we had got back together and we were starting to explore our relationship. We didn't get engaged straight away, but re-engaged again. But she sat me down. We're up at my parents' place. We were out in the park that was there, and we were sitting there chatting. And she told me her story, and part of her story was that at the age of 15, she had an abortion.
Wow.
And now, if you know my wife, I'm telling you, she will kill for her kids. So that instinct in her as a mother has been in her from an early age. That abortion is always deeply traumatizing. It traumatized her. She never wanted that to happen. Anyway, but she thought, this guy doesn't know me. And she had been told beforehand, for good reasons, you're a new person in Christ, you don't have to talk about that, but she had kept bringing it up. And so all of this came together, and that's all another story, but she needed to tell me that story. And, I mean, of course, that was a shock, but I responded. My head's spinning with all of this, but I responded because I thought, well, love is a choice. And so I remember picking her up in my arms and carrying her to the car. I wanted to know that I loved her. So I tell you that part of the story because there was still a lot of shame attached to that. That's part of Karen's story. And we got married in 1981. That was great, but whenever that subject would come up, because we're both strongly pro-life, but whenever that subject came up in Christian circles or with friends, I could always feel Karen tense up, and I knew I had to be careful. So on one hand, it's been great as a pastor because I've had a wife who has experienced the pain and trauma of this. So how I've approached this subject has always been with compassion. You don't condemn, but you come with compassion. But there came a point where, and it would have been 20 years after she'd had the abortion, so she was in her mid-30s. And I'm sitting in my office at Thornley, I'm listening to this tape, and this lady shared her story, and I thought, this just sounds like Karen's story. And it was that God moment when I thought, I've got to go home and share this with her. So I go home, I said, I've been listening to this tape. I want you to listen to it. Not saying anything. I'll come back at lunch. I came back. She was ironing. She's thinking, I'm going to listen to this, but she did. I came back and she was a mess.
Wow.
Oh, dear.
But that was the beginning of actually healing the deeper hurt. But the thing was, it took us a long time to get there, and it was a God thing, and it's being sensitive to when God is moving in this. We never hid anything. She wasn't hiding anything, but she'd never dealt with the shame and the hurt and the stuff, and that's where God started to bring all of that out.
I just want to come from a male perspective there, and your response in that, because the reality is, obviously, when you guys started getting close in your relationship, she ran away. She was carrying all of that stuff, and then she came back and realized that she had to tell you this story. I just want to, I suppose, highlight the importance of your response in that moment, because that could have that could have broken things again for her.
Oh, yeah.
What was that like? Obviously, you'd had the conversation. You knew that you could see that this was still affecting her. As a husband and wife navigating those early years of marriage, let's be honest, it's pretty tough because you're getting to know each other and live together and see what it's really like. How was that for you both?
So we both married at the age of 20. And what I keep saying to people, and it's not original to me, is at 20, you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
So we've had that talk. But because we both came from, everybody comes from a dysfunctional background, but because we had all this junk in our families, we both, because we're Christians, we both made certain commitments, which has stood us in good stead. The first one was we will always resolve conflict. Now, did we have the best resolving skills for conflict? No way. No way. But did we resolve conflict? Every time. Somehow or other, we would get there. We chose we would always resolve conflict. And that stood us in good stead. And to be honest with each other, there were certain, and the other one was we were not going to make the same mistakes that our family had made. So I knew enough. Yeah. I knew before I met Karen, and this is God's grace in my life because of I've said to people, I've had this weird Catholic evangelical upbringing, born into a non-Christian family, but raised in an evangelical church. So I've got this weird kind of background, but there were certain things I learned and I saw in godly men in the church who spoke into my life, and I think that's a key factor here. And so I knew enough that if I was going to get married, I didn't want it to be like my mum and dad.
Yeah.
I was going to do things differently. And Karen was the same. So we made that commitment. We're not going to do things the same. That's what I want to say to blokes is, guys, don't just think about this generation. Think of the next 100 years, anchoring your family in Christ.
You've been listening to Momentum, a show that helps men succeed in life. For more information or to hear this week's show again, go to momentumaustralia.org. You can also access a whole range of resources to help you on your journey and to get in touch with the team at momentumaustralia.org.